everyone. Welcome to another episode in our series of Just Ship It. Today we're here with Evan Yu. Some of you may know him as the creator of Vue.js. Can I say that, Evan? Creator of Vue.js?
Yeah.
And so many other things. I mean, I don't know. I guess you're just like tangentially or, not tangentially associated with like creating Vite, right? And just like all the other
hmm
amazing things within the ecosystem. Do you want to just do a quick, like, I don't know, intro, I
Uh,
guess, for people who don't know
uh,
you?
sure. Yeah. I'm primarily work on Vue and Vite. So Vue is a front end framework, and Vite is a build tool that supports not just Vue but also a lot of other frameworks. Um, and I'm a independent open source developer, and I've been independent since 2016. So that's like 7 years now. And yeah, open source is pretty much all I do.
That's amazing because I feel like everybody wants to live that dream of being a full-time open source developer,
hmm Yeah,
but it's hard. So
it
how
is. It
how did
is.
you do it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of luck and persistence in a way. Um, I think when obviously I started doing open source before going independent. I think my first commit to Vue was in 2013. Actually, a user actually a team member pointed that out a few days ago on Twitter. The very first commit of Vue was more than 10 years old now. So that was even before Vue was called Vue. I think I did that when I was still at Google. I did that purely in my spare time. It's just like um, basically trying to scratch my own itch as a sort of I don't know. It's more like a hobby or a form of entertainment because it's not strictly related to my work. It's like like partially related, but I did not have the intention to actually use it in my work in the beginning. So obviously, I was using AngularJS in some of the work projects, and AngularJS did provide some inspiration for the initial design of Vue. But when I started working on it, it was purely out of I just found it interesting. It's just like an interesting problem. Whenever you got some spare time and you're like, I don't want to do work. I want to do fun work,
Is it
right?
like just to
So
like understand, were you trying to like understand how frameworks worked? Was that
yeah,
the okay.
that's part of it. The other is essentially when I see how the API was designed around AngularJS, and I was like, can we do it differently? Like if
Oh.
I'm basically I guess in a lot of cases I'm kind of like API driven development. It's like I design how things I think about how it should work first, like at an API level, then I figure out how to implement it, right? So for me, I didn't really dig too much into AngularJS source code. For me, it's like I know how the API should work. I want to figure out how to implement it myself. That was the interesting part.
That's a It's funny because I think in Java, or not in JavaScript, but in open source, maybe not just even in open source. I think in the world generally, right? Like we're always thinking, like, I mean, who hasn't worked on a large project and like accidentally built a state management library, right?
Yeah.
So many people, right? But I think it's interesting to kind of hear you talk about it because it's like
Mhm.
you see a problem, you kind of see something, or you see a little bit of it, and
Mhm.
you think, hey, how can I do this differently? And then, all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, because 10 years ago, I think a lot of people fail to realize that. Although 10 years ago
Yeah.
seems insane. I
It
mean,
is, right?
that's
It feels like
2013.
yeah. I mean, JavaScript move like people always say JavaScript moves so fast, right? The ecosystem moves so fast, so, like things come and go, right? And surprisingly, Vue is like 10 years old technically.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of funny because like I think when it first came out, I saw people start saying like, "Oh, it's just by a random guy who's doing it for fun. Who knows
Mhm.
if it's gonna be here in a year or two, right?" I saw
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
kind of comment like every single year until like maybe these years, maybe these 2 to 3 years, I don't see that anymore. But like I've saw that, I've just seen that for so many years, and it's just always the same. But it's all Vue's always been here. So
Yeah. Yeah. So how did it like how did it get I mean, how did you even you're just like a startup, right? Like I mean, did you try again? Did it just all of a sudden take off when you released it? What was the kind of inflection point?
I think I think one of the there are maybe a few moments like it's not like just a one because it's a pretty long process, right? I think the initial thing I did right was to publicize it on Hacker News and a few other different channels. Essentially, whatever I read about open source libraries back then, I just like try to get Vue on there, right, to let people know about it. I think that attracts your initial users, and also I think the adoption wise compared to something like React or Angular is that React Angular are born out of enterprise. They are born out of these big corporations where essentially the pitch people see in those frameworks is like, oh, like Facebook using it, Google's using it, it must be good. We're gonna use it too, right? For Vue, we don't have that kind of branding power. Uh, like I'm like some people know I'm an ex Googler, but like I never associated Vue with Google because it's like a purely personal project, right? So to a lot of people, it's like kind of unproven, but it's also this unproven status allowed us to just be really, focused on small things in the beginning. Like we never claimed to say Vue is powering like huge applications at Megacorp X, like in the beginning. In the beginning, it's really just like we're trying to solve really simple problems. If you like it, you can use it. Right. I think that kind of adoption is kind of different from this sort of um, I think the direction of adoption is quite different because Vue is really bottom up. It's like a lot of people used it in their personal projects. They liked it. They introduced it into their maybe their team setting, maybe their company, and then in the same process, we start expanding on the offering, like adding routers, state management, dev tools, and all that stuff, which eventually made it more convincing for people to adopt it in production projects. Um, I think on the other hand, like Angular is really the other way around because like a lot of big companies are like, oh, this is the Google stuff. This is the enterprise framework. We're just gonna adopt it right away, right? It's a very different sort of adoption story, and for us, I think that kind of makes sense because the growth of the framework is kind of aligns with the growth of the scope itself. Like initially, it's just really a view layer library. Then we added pieces to make it more like a proper framework, right? And there is a process evolution. Like I think I did a talk about the history or the evolution of Vue, and there are a few phases where I think it was only in 2016 we released like 1.0. So after 1.0, and then we started adding like more SPA stuff like the router, dev tools, CLI, right? These are the things that sort of solidified it as a framework. I think um, one, if if we were to think about one inflection point, I think it would be the moment when it was adopted by the Laravel community when Taylor found out about it. Taylor Otwell found out about it, and he essentially said he was trying to learn a front end framework, and he didn't like React, so he went with Vue. Um, I think it's also a reflection of the way Vue is designed. It's just naturally easier to grasp for developers who are relatively new to front end in a way, right? We try to think about how can you just introduce the most basic concepts and get something on the screen as fast as possible, right? And one thing that Vue was able to do also is similar to AngularJS, that you can write your template directly in HTML and then just make it interactive. That's really important for primarily backend developers, because for them, the world starts with servers sending some HTML. And what they want is something that makes that HTML interactive. It's very different from what we kind of think about front end frameworks. We assume like there's a Node.js server, and like the framework is responsible for like SSR and generating HTML and sending it to the client, or React server components, right? The worldview is completely different for say PHP developers, or other backend languages. Like for them, the worldview is the backend framework is sending all the HTML to the front end, and then they think about how to make it interactive. Like even today, I think Laravel, the Laravel community is still kind of playing a lot with different ways of making this model more back-end friendly. Like they have solutions like Inertia, uh, which is essentially using back-end routes to build SPAs. So they write their routing on the back end with PHP, but the result is actually an SPA with front end components. Or there's other interesting things like Livewire, which is more like they actually write the whole components in PHP as well, but it's sort of wired up on the front end to do the automatic updating. So there's just a lot of I think Vue's adoption definitely got a lot of help in initial phase by being easy to integrate with these traditional backend frameworks. So that
I
definitely
love
helped.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know a lot of, I mean, if you look at, I mean, let's say Angular, for example, right?
Hmm.
It's always like, oh, well, because Angular has TypeScript, it's much easier for .NET developers to understand,
Yeah.
right? So that story is interesting. And, I always see, Vue with PHP, Laravel
Hmm.
backends, but I didn't
Hmm.
realize that's why. I just thought, oh, well, maybe it
Yeah.
just like works really well. But it's funny that it came from, somebody influential in the PHP community saying, hey,
Hmm.
this works out really well for me. So, okay. So another question is, adoption wise, right? I mean, we definitely see different regions adopting different frameworks and libraries, but
Hmm.
I feel like with Vue, there was a lot of adoption kind of in Asia in
Hmm.
the beginning, right? Like how did that happen?
I think definitely has a lot to do with me being active in China.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, so I was, even though I was living in the US, I still, on some Chinese social network
Uh-huh.
websites. So back then, there's a website called Zhihu, which is essentially the Chinese version of Quora.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a platform where people can ask questions. So in the early days of Vue, I try I answered a lot of front end related questions on there, but not really with the purpose of promoting viewing anyway. It's just sort of also just a kill time thing, like I sometimes browse it, and sometimes I see a question, I'm like, I see the other answers, I'm like, no, this is not it. I'm just like, someone's wrong on the internet.
It's like this, it's like Stack Overflow for Asia, but different.
It's more like Quora.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
but
Oh,
but
it's
there
so
were a lot of
interesting.
but there were a lot of programmers on there
Yeah.
in the early days. I think the demography has changed a lot these days, which
Mm-hmm.
is why I don't really use it anymore. But um, in the early days, Zhihu, and also on Weibo, which is like the Chinese version of Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
um, I would sometimes answer questions or debate with people about some front end technology stuff. Um, so at the same time, obviously, when I started working on Vue, I would occasionally talk about like this is how I do it in Vue, and why it solves this certain problem. So I think that definitely helped popularize it in China in a way. And also because the Chinese documentation, the initial version of it, I wrote in I basically translated myself. I'm a native Chinese speaker, so it does make a difference when a native speaker translates something. So I'm the author of the English docs, then I translate myself into Chinese. So the quality I think is definitely different compared to say like translated by someone else trying to first understand the original version then translated into another language, right?
Oh, that
So
makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Um, so I think having complete Chinese docs written by a native speaker early also really helped
yeah.
because around that time, I think in general, I would say adoption of like new technology lags a little behind in China, mostly because sometimes because of language barrier. I
Mhm.
wouldn't say it's in every field, but like in front end it was lagging a little behind. So when they started trying to adopt this new kind of, I mean, when SPA was still the new thing back then,
Mhm.
um, obviously a lot of people trying to jump onto SPA and they noticed like Vue is the framework with the easiest docs for them to understand. I think it definitely also helped.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, React is huge in China now too,
Yeah.
mostly because how dominant it is in the
Yeah.
enterprise space. So but I guess thanks to the translation, Vue is able to compete in some way.
Yeah. Okay, so you went from side project at Google, and then
Hmm.
what? Like,
Side project at Google, then side project in Meteor.
okay.
So
So
when I
you're
left
working at
Google, I only
Meteor.
yeah.
Okay.
But Vue remained a side project for me
Mhm.
because Meteor had its own front end layer called Blaze.
Mhm.
Um, So in a way, Blaze is actually has a lot of similarities with today's Vue, right? It has a fine-grained reactivity system. Actually, it's the same thing in Solid, in Vue, in Blaze, in Knockout. They're all kind of really similar.
Mhm.
But in a way, Media's front end layer was a bit difficult to use, I would
Mhm.
say, because mostly it's just its own thing. So at the later stage, Meteor decided to say we're gonna adopt a more popular front end layer,
Mhm.
but they went with React because React had more mindshare, especially in Silicon Valley, because
Yes. Yes.
Meteor for the market Meteor was targeting it's mostly other startups in
Uh
Silicon
huh.
Valley, right?
Mhm.
And for them, they're like, what are these startups using? They're mostly using React. So I would say business uh, on the from business perspective, it's the right call for them. But for me, it's like, then what am I doing here, right? So so eventually, I left Meteor to focus full time on Vue because
Did you do it
that
like
was
after some sort, like some income level that you were getting at all, or did you just like quit and just say, "Hey, I'm just going to do this"?
I played with the idea of having a Patreon and have before I left. So I had the idea pretty much like I guess in the last few months, Meteor really adoption was not really going that well at that time. I think due to some technical decisions, like it had its own package management system, the distribution model, it's like its own like a big distribution that you need to install instead of like just npm install. Um, so in a way, it even included its own Node.js distribution. So Meteor had this ambition of being something bigger than Node.js. It wanted to be like essentially it wanted to be the way of writing server-side like full stack JavaScript, right? Before Node.js was a thing. So it essentially meant it needs to sort of be this all-encompassing environment. So the concept is quite different. So unfortunately, Node.js blew up, right? So the development model quickly switched to everyone just like npm installing a bunch of stuff and putting small packages together with Node.js. Um, and that just put Meteor in a pretty awkward situation. So eventually the company pivoted, and I pretty much left around the same time they decided to
Was that
pivot
like
to
2015, 2016,
2016. Yeah,
2016? Okay.
yeah,
And this is right when the ES 2015 standards, well, I guess ES, right after ES
yeah,
2015. So just like all the
yeah,
stuff was happening in JavaScript. That was
yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, I think
But what made you like want to
yeah.
take the jump, right? Like, did you leave and you had like
Mhm.
a few months savings, or like your wife
Yeah,
was working
I
so you could
I
do
definitely had
that?
enough
Or
savings. Definitely had enough savings to go on for at least a year or so.
okay.
Yeah, and I already had around maybe 3 to 4 thousand a month from Patreon as
Oh,
well.
cool. So you had already started Patreon. Oh, that's so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
nice. Okay, so like you were
Yeah.
good.
So yeah, the initial fund, I actually talked about this in a few occasions, but the initial 6 months, I got a $3,000 or $2,000 a month. I think it's $3,000 a month from a friend's company called Strikingly. So they're a YC funded company startup back then, and they use a lot of open source. Um, and they are big supporters of open source as well. So the CTO was a friend of mine, and he's like, "We have this rotating open source fund that's gonna we pick a project, we're gonna support it for 6 months, and we're gonna give this 6 months to Vue, so you can work on it, right?"
That's
So
amazing.
that yeah, that really helped, right? That
Yeah.
just basically gives me a sort of a buffer or safety net in
Yeah.
a way. And for me, the plan was always quite simple. It's like um, so first of all, for me, the decision was like, do I want to keep working on something that I potentially not 100% passionate about, or do I want to work on something that I'm just like super enjoy, like right? Because I think for around that time when I worked on Vue, I found it like just super. It didn't feel like work in a way. It's just like it's your creation, and you just want to make it better, right?
Do you feel that way
Uh,
now?
Now it's a lot more responsibility, right? Because
Yeah.
the pace you can move at when you are at this scale is just much more difficult. Back then, making decisions is much easier. Like I don't have that many users. I
Here's the
can just
breaking
like
changes.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And out of the maybe like couple thousand, I don't know how many users I had back then. Probably like below 100,000.
Uh-huh.
Only a few of them would ever like come to say this new API, like even express an opinion on how the API changes work, right? So
Yeah.
mostly it's like you can move as fast as you want, and change things and just come up with ideas and implement them the next day, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the pace is really different. So you get a lot more instant sort of feedback on like this sort of I want to do something, I get it done. So this
Yes.
sort of positive feedback is really strong in the early days. So
That's why I love front end development.
yeah, it also it's also I was much younger back then. Didn't
Yeah.
have kids, so it's like even if I work long hours, I don't really feel like it's like painful or anything. It's like even enjoyable to some extent.
Right, right,
Uh,
right. Were you with your
right. So
wife back then? Were you married?
2016, yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Was she freaking out
So
that you were going to quit your job? And I
I
mean, you didn't
didn't
have
tell.
kids, so like it wasn't as crazy,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't tell her until a few months later.
You quit your job
Right.
and you didn't tell her?
Yeah, because I was working remotely.
Oh
So
my God.
yeah, but the plan was always like, hey, if this doesn't work out, I'll just go back and find a job,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I was pretty confident I can do. So
Yeah.
and she knew that too.
Yeah.
Um, so for her, she was pretty supportive. Obviously, she was mad at me for not telling her earlier, but she's
Well, when
like,
did you tell her? Was it
so
like after a certain point of, income? You were like, by the way. but it's
not
okay because here I
not
am.
income. I think it's when she saw some emails about like the health insurance because I need to like get the Cobra after
Oh,
you
so you
end.
would have told her you told her because you had to.
Yeah, but it's yeah, it's earned sooner or later, right? So after I explained that this whole idea of you see, this thing is growing pretty well. If it doesn't work out, I can always go back to find a job. Um, and yeah, I think I was lucky in a way. Like the Patreon grew pretty healthily. So very quickly, I was making close to, close to before I left Meteor.
Mhm.
So and yeah, and it just like it also because we had a pretty decent saving already, so
Yeah.
we wasn't really kind of it wasn't really that stressful to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's amazing. Um, so I love your story because I feel like it's just like, you start something and you're doing it for fun, and then you do something
mhm.
because it doesn't feel like work, and then, and then you make it work, and
Yeah.
then
I think yeah, I've always felt lucky in the way that I somehow made the sponsorship model work
yes,
without
yes,
without a very like sort of struggling process. I felt like it
yes,
just like naturally started going up to the point where I'm like, this is enough to make a living on, right?
yes,
I think what I see is a lot of developers do struggle with this process. They're making maybe a few $1,000s a month, but like it's sort of fluctuating,
yeah,
and it's just not quite enough for them to consider it a full-time job, right?
right, right, right,
I think that's the part where it's sort of this chasm that you have to cross.
yeah,
So I feel like I'm kind of lucky I just crossed that without really struggling too much.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you think it was kind of like because Vue, in a sense, was like growing at like a trajectory, so like your Patreon kind of grew at the same trajectory?
Yeah, I think it definitely had to do with all the, out of work hours I put into it. Uh, in the past, in the 3 years before that, right? Because I worked a lot on Vue in my spare time.
Yeah.
Uh, before
So
that
really
as
Vue
well.
existed. So you quit your job 2016. So Vue really existed like 3 years prior, which
Hmm.
I think is interesting because I think again, especially in JavaScript, like it just looks like things happen overnight, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because I still remember the conversation of Vue, and I can't remember when it was. Maybe it
Hmm.
was like around 2016-ish, 2017-ish timeframe, 2015 to 2017, somewhere around there. But do you remember when that article came out and it was like, oh my gosh, Vue has more stars than React or something? Like, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was like some report came out and it was like Vue is actually like on par with React, and it just came out of
Uh,
nowhere. Do you remember this?
Not really.
Really?
Yeah, maybe I personally, I mean, because for me, it's never an overnight thing, right?
Yes, you're like, yeah, so what?
Yeah.
I've been seeing it grow for, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think to a lot of the community, it was like, whoa, all of a sudden Vue came
Mm,
out of whatever. And then it's like, oh, but everyone was at Google. Oh, everyone worked at, so like you dig in and you're like, oh, well, I guess it didn't come out of nowhere. But I think when a lot of people were initially introduced to it, they were
mm,
like, whoa, look at this framework that has so many stars. And it just came out of nowhere and it's so popular. And then there was this like,
yeah.
oh, it's really
Yeah.
popular just in China, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but
There's always this. I think it's just because we are not backed by a big corp. So the discovery
yes,
channels are a bit different. A lot of people, when they, especially I think in the US, if people are like deeply in the corporate setting or in the Silicon Valley startup scene,
yeah,
uh, they tend to sort of only know about React or
right,
Angular,
right,
right?
right.
So Vue has always been this sort of like very indie thing. Um, surprisingly, we got more fair share of adoption outside of US. I would say, like,
Mhm.
say in France or in Europe in general.
Mhm.
Um, I think the network effect of React coming out of Facebook and all these startups using React, this network effect is really strong in
Yeah.
US and in
Mhm.
Silicon Valley in particular.
Mhm.
So Vue kind of has to sort of, our adoption is like really organic. It's like we didn't even, we don't have any sort of marketing budget in any way. So
Yeah.
it's like
But
it's
you
all
were
organic.
doing a lot of it. Like, I mean, I love to hear that, in the beginning
Uh-huh.
you were like going to the different articles or whatever, or trying to get it written about and things like that. I mean, I don't think a lot of people
Uh-huh.
think about that or
Yeah. I didn't really enjoy spending a lot of time on that kind of thing.
right.
It's inevitable in a way. I think only did it like proactively in the very, very early stages.
Yeah.
Like I think I went to talk about it at a few conferences.
Mhm.
Um, Essentially, literally that was the kind of talk that's like, let me tell you about this new thing. It's called Vue.js. Uh, but I think I only did a few of them, like before 2016. Um, then after that, it's mostly just working on things and doing releases, just like shipping. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what motivates you now? Like, what excites you about, like, when I say what motivates you now, I
hmm
don't just mean like with Vue or this or that or
hmm
whatever, but like, I guess in your life, like, are you
Uh,
still, I just want to build, 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 or are you like,
hmm I think it's sort of I think I'm at a stage where I'm trying to find ways to scale myself
okay,
because I realize, I still want to write a lot of code, but I also have so many responsibilities as, as a project lead, as with like in the Vue ecosystem, we have people working on things that are important to Vue, and I kind of, have to be their sponsor to support their work, not just like at a technical level, but also at a financial level. Um, like the ecosystem has grown to a scale where it's impossible to just be a one-man project, right? So there are different people working on different parts. I also say like Vite is also a team of different people working on it. Even inside Vue, we have people like Johnson who's working on our IDE support, Volar, Vue TSC, the toolchain. So in a way, I'm trying to find ways to essentially try to scale the project beyond myself. I
yeah,
still want to write code, but at the
yeah,
same time, I realize I don't have the time to write all the code I want to write.
yeah.
Right?
Well, so are you going to
So
lean more towards like writing less code, you think, and being more vision, or you think you're going to stay like in the code and you want to figure out other ways to scale, like have other people kind of do the,
definitely trying to find more people to be able to essentially uh, take over more ownership of
hmm
things,
hmm
so that I can focus on the things that I think are most valuable for me to put time in.
yeah, like
Right?
more tech leads almost in a
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Mm.
Um, I still find a lot of joy in just like working on new features, right?
Yeah,
Uh, Maintenance, like to be 100% honest, not so much. It's necessary work, right? But at
yeah,
this point, like it's mostly I'm doing it out of responsibility. It's like
right, right, right.
it's the thing that I've always been doing and I will keep doing.
So
Um,
you might want like more people to like help with the maintenance aspect of things.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't there like, doesn't Node have like, I don't know what they specifically call it, but isn't there some sort of like maintenance team? Like I know there's a release team, for example, right, for Node,
hmm
but like
Yeah.
I wonder if they have some sort of like maintenance team or something as well.
There are a lot of active contributors. I think the challenge is it's maybe it's me, in some way I'm sometimes I can be a bottleneck because there are a lot of PRs coming in.
Right,
Right?
right.
There are a lot of people trying to contribute, but I just can't help. I want to like thoroughly review every single one of them,
Yes,
and I
yes,
have
yes.
this sort of obsession with making sure every line that goes into Vue core needs to. I need to feel comfortable doing it, right? So
So is
having
that like
someone,
giving up the reins? Like, who would you trust Anthony to do it?
if he's up for it, I would. Yeah, Anthony. The thing with Anthony is he has his own ambitions, right? He has so many projects. He got his hands full too, right?
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes.
which is a cool thing. I want to
Yeah,
support him doing that, right? I
yeah,
think
yeah.
he creates more value doing the kind of thing he's doing.
You need to find
And,
like the
yeah.
Mark Erickson of Vue. Because I feel like Mark Erickson is like really good. Mark Erickson, for
Mhm,
those of you who don't know, is one of the maintainers of Redux. But he's so good at
mhm.
like keeping the community
Yeah, I think
together and like
I'm lucky
maintaining
enough to
it.
find someone. I'm lucky enough to already found someone like that for Vite, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, Matthias, or Patak. A lot of people know him by the cat avatar.
Yeah.
Uh, he's essentially being doing like an amazing job at maintaining Vite.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
you know, he's just like coordinating a lot of people like from different parties, like because Vite is now a shared infrastructure between a lot of different projects. Like there are
Yes,
people
yes,
on
yes.
there, so there are contributors from Astro, from Svelte, from a lot of different places, and Matthias is essentially tying a lot of these people together to making sure like everyone is like working together as a community, as an ecosystem,
Yeah.
which is like truly amazing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so in a way, like when I started Veed, I was worried like how do I split the time between the two, right?
Yeah.
So I think like which is also like I realized like if I am as hands on as I am with Veed like I am with Vue, it's probably going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
So I was cautious about that in the very early stages of Vite. So I essentially started calling like assembling a team and trying to like actively asking people to position themselves as team members with sort of ownership and responsibility early on, right?
Yeah.
So this I think Vite is in a very healthy situation
Yeah.
on in
I
that
mean, you've done
regard.
an
Yeah.
incredible job with that. It sounds like now you
Yeah.
just need to figure out how to do it for Vue.
Yeah, I mean, Vue is different also. Like I
Yeah.
think it's cool to it's okay to run the two projects differently.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
in a way I feel like the general direction of Vite, I've set the general direction of Vite and I feel like under that like overall structure it's less likely for things to go wrong, like the purpose, the goal and the scope. Like I think it depends on the project. For Vue, the scope is always going to change, and there's a lot of like I just need a much deeper level of involvement with the code that goes into Vue compared to Vite. Um, but obviously, I wish we can get Vue to a more move a bit closer to Vite, like Vite situation right now. But it's just something I'm trying to do, right? But
Well, everything takes time,
yeah, I
but
just need to let go of some of the sort of control that I want to. It's just like I've been working on V for so long,
yeah.
it's like letting your kids go to college for their first time, Like although I've never experienced that, but it's kind of a similar feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, no, that's so amazing.
yeah.
I loved chatting with you and thank you so much for sharing some of
Mhm.
your story. I guess for those of you who are interested, and we always talk about this, but if you're interested in doing contributions to a specific framework or library, Vue, or anything within the Vue ecosystem, definitely check out like the GitHub repos and the issues. And I don't know, Evan, like I always tell people like starting with the documentation, of course, but
Mhm.
what about like
I would say
reviews or
start,
anything.
yeah, help review PRs is
Yes,
cool.
yes.
And also
Reviewing
help
PRs.
triage issues. Like,
Hmm.
for example, sometimes
Like replicate bugs and stuff like that.
improving the reproduction, or
Yeah.
sometimes like you don't need to necessarily completely fix an issue. You can try to do it and just share whatever findings you find in the process. That can
Oh.
maybe save a lot of time for the maintainer when they come to it, they realize, oh, like maybe the thing you found actually helps them to instantly notice like the root cause of the problem. It's a very common thing.
Oh, I
Like,
love that. So you're like,
yeah,
look, you don't have to solve the bugs or
yeah,
fully reproduce. Just be like, look, if you spent 15, 20 minutes doing something and going down a path, at least
yeah,
post your work,
yeah,
even
yeah.
if it's
Sure.
incomplete, because that helps.
Yeah. So for example, like if it's a general bug, you can like narrow it down to a few situations, right?
Yeah.
That already saved a lot of time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I love that. Well, awesome. Okay. And then what's the best way to like get in touch with you?
on GitHub.
Do
Yeah.
you listen to all your GitHub notifications?
Not really, because there are just way too many. So I typically do like pull based instead of push based, right? So it's
Right.
like instead of responding to something as soon as they come in,
Yeah.
I just like rotate between a few projects, like, and try to do things in batch.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That
yeah,
makes sense. Okay, cool.
yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us. And
Mhm.
hopefully, you all enjoyed Evan's story, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks.
Thanks.